I'm Norman Fischer, and I'm an ex-abbot of the Zen Center and also a poet, which I guess is why I'm hosting this event tonight, which I'm super happy to do. Thanks, Zen Center, for sponsoring this. And especially thanks to Tess, who I'm going to introduce in a second, and to all the other poets who are going to read tonight, and beyond them, the poets who have work in this really terrific anthology that looks like this, leaning toward the light, poems for gardens and the hands that tend them. Now, you might wonder, why is this event being sponsored by the Zen Center? What does gardening have to do with Zen? Well, plenty. There's all the Japanese gardens, the Zen gardens, you know about that. But more than that, taking care of things, especially taking care of gardens and physical things, the natural things, is maybe the most important part of Zen practice. It's actually the theme of Soto Zen, taking care of things. And in Zen monasteries, it's actually literally the case that they spend more time wiping down the wood and tending the garden paths than they do meditating. The first thing to say about this book is that it is a gorgeous book. It's really beautiful to hold in your hand. It's beautiful to look at. It's full of colored drawings that are really great. And the book design is pretty special. It even has one of these. Look at this. A ribbon bookmark, so you can put the bookmark in there, and if you have your favorite poem, it's there. You don't have to fumble around looking for a bookmark. It's terrific. Not only that, but it has recipes in it, right? The recipes, favorite recipes of the poets. You won't find that, online or in any cookbook. In short, you're going to want to get like 2 or 3 copies of this, because it's a great book to give for the holidays. Think about it. Doesn't everybody want to have this book for Hanukkah, for Christmas, for Thanksgiving, for New Year's, all that? So it's a great book. Okay. Now I want to introduce Tess, who's going to be our master of ceremonies, and she's the editor of the book. She was born and raised in El Cerrito, where she lives now with her family. It goes without saying that she gardens and she raises chickens in El Cerrito. I didn't know there were a lot of chickens in El Cerrito, but at least we have Tess's chickens. We know that. She also helps to restore a community garden there. And she is the poetry reviewer for NPR's All Things Considered. She's on the faculty of the Ashland University's MFA program, and of course, is a beautiful poet herself with lots of books, including The Misremembered World, The Forage House, Works and Days, and in 2020, she published 2 books, Last West, Road Songs for Dorothea Lange, and Rift Zone, and of course, has some poems in the book. So she's going to take us on this brilliant journey through this book, and I'm really excited to do it and very glad that I was invited to be here. So enjoy and go for it, Tess.
Norman, thank you so much for that lovely introduction, and also for your connection to poetry and the Zen Center. I was at the bookstore signing books the other day and saw Norman's wonderful books about the practice of Zen, and also his new book of poems, which I took a peek at. So one of the things that happened at the Zen Center was that for the first time in many weeks, I felt an ability to kind of put down the confusion of the world for a few moments and feel a peacefulness, or just a peaceful watchfulness, which is a kind of attention that I think I also get through gardening. But it's a really special place, and you'll see that at the end of this program, this free program, we're also making an appeal, and a matching grant has become available for small donations to help support the Zen Center and all of its work in the world. So just to put that out there as well. During the maybe third month of the pandemic, I got a phone call from a friend who's an editor who knew me from the time that I worked at a farm in the Berkshires. And she called me and she said, Tess, I have this idea for you. I would like you to edit a new anthology of contemporary gardening poems. And it was so uncanny that I had that call right then because there was actually dirt under my fingernails from planting tomatoes in the front yard. And it was a time and season where my front yard garden had become this little hub for a small neighborhood community of people who were still standing at a great distance from each other, but would stop by to share plants and gardening tips. And sometimes it was the most social we would be, that week. And we would share fog resistant tomatoes or strategies for growing shiitakes in like a shady side yard. And it felt to me like the plants could be friends, even if we weren't able to get close. And I realized that gardens are places that invite in diversity, wildness, repair, that tendril outward. And I think that that's actually what poems do for us too. That they are also ways of leaning across difference, sometimes of sharing breath when it's not possible to share breath. And so the dream of this anthology was born. A lot of gardening anthologies that are out there reprint some Victorian poems and slap some roses and lace on the cover, and that's it. But this is actually a curation of poets who are working to tend the earth in the face of catastrophe, in the face of climate disaster, with a hunger for racial and food justice. And basically those were and who are just wanting to touch the earth. And so it was such a joy to bring these poets together. And what a ride, what a wonderful lineup of poets are in the anthology: Jericho Brown, Ada Limon, and then these poets who I'm going to introduce tonight. So in the interest of time, I didn't want to read everybody's longest bio with their with their many distinguished awards and accolades, because it would take so much time when I want you to just know that these are some of the best poets writing in the world right now. But I will tell you briefly that Naomi Shihab Nye is a professor of creative writing at Texas State University and recently served as Young People's Poet Laureate. That Mark Doty cannot be with us tonight for some unfortunate reasons, but he is the author of 9 books of poetry and the winner of numerous awards, including the National Book Critics Circle, the Guggenheim, and the National Endowment for the Arts. And when his spot comes, Janine, Lentine, and I will read his poems. Danusha Lameris is the author of 2 acclaimed collections, The Moons of August and Bonfire Opera. She's on the faculty of Pacific University's low residency MFA program. Janine Lentine is the magnificent connection to the Zen Center by which this tremendous reading has come about. She is the author of 3 chapbooks and is a conduit to Stanley Kunitz, another very important poet gardener, about who she's written beautifully and who has a remarkable poem in the book. And she really planted the seeds that made this reading possible tonight. And I can't thank her enough. She's a really tremendous person and poet. And thank you so much, Janine, for making this happen. And finally, Jane Hirschfield is a longtime friend of the Zen Center and the author of many books, including The Asking, her new and selected. In case you just want one great tome, you could do that. And it was actually for sale at the Zen Center bookstore when I went in to sign books last week. But so then you could also maybe order it from Zen Center as well. And she is a former chancellor of the Academy of American Poets and was recently elected to the Academy of Arts and Sciences. So what an honor to have gathered these poems and poets into a book. I learned that the word anthology actually means bouquet. So I'm so honored to have these poems and poets in this bouquet, and so grateful to all of you to come out on a difficult time in the world to celebrate something tendriling up. Thank you for being here with us. I'm going to kick off the reading just by opening with the first poem in the book. One thing that I love is that the book calls you in with so much lush beauty. And the first poem in the book is by a great scholar of joy, Ross Gay. And this poem is called A Small Needful Fact. A small needful fact is that Eric Garner worked for some time for the Parks and Rec Horticultural Department, which means perhaps that with his very large hands, perhaps, in all likelihood, he put gently into the earth some plants which, most likely, some of them, in all likelihood, continue to grow, continue to do what such plants do, like house and feed small and necessary creatures, like being pleasant to touch and smell, like converting sunlight into food, like making it easier for us to breathe. Thank you. Next up is Naomi.
Thank you, Tess. Thank you, Norman. And thanks to the San Francisco Zen Center for the comfort of connection with you tonight, and all poets and listeners here. We appreciate your being here. I'm reading first a poem by Danusha Lameris called Feeding the Worms. Ever since I found out that earthworms have taste buds all over the delicate pink strings of their bodies, I pause, dropping apple peels into the compost bin. Imagine the dark, writhing ecstasy, the sweetness of apples permeating their pores. I offer beets and parsley, avocado and melon, the feathery tops of carrots. I'd always thought theirs a menial life, eyeless and hidden, almost vulgar, though now it seems they bear a pleasure so sublime, so decadent. I want to contribute however I can, forgetting a moment, my place on the menu. Thanks, Danusha. I'm reading Fennel by Thom Gunn. I only met Thom Gunn once in 1982, but coincidentally, the place we shared a meal was in Berkeley, and it absolutely fits the first two lines of his poem. I really love this poem. Fennel, Thom Gunn. High fog, white sky, above me on the bouldered hill, where I stumble between head high and scattered clumps of weed. Fennel, of which I once thought seed, made you invisible. Each forms a light green mist, feathery auras, though the look deceives. For looked at closely, they consist of tiny leading into tinier leaves, in which each fork is sharply separate. Yet tender, touched, I pinch a sprig and sniff, and it reminds me of the other times I have pinched fennel sprigs for this fierce poignancy. I stand here as if lost, as if invisible on this broken cliff, invisible sky above. And for a second, I float free of personality and die into my senses, into the unglossed, unglossable, sweet and transporting, yet attaching smell. The very agent that releases me, holding me here as well. What a gentle, gracious poet, Thom Gunn. And my poem from the book is called Palestine Vine. And I keep thinking these days about all the strawberry patches in Gaza. It was a favored crop there. Seeds wrapped tenderly in plastic. One package said white, one red. Hand lettered, mailed by friends I never met. They grew instantly, strangely confining themselves to one corner of the metal container, as if a metaphor. I swear I planted them all over. Leafy vines popped forth, glory and green lengthening overnight. I didn't notice one had twined around the rungs of the table. Today, moving the pot, the biggest vine ripped out, broke off. No! How could I have missed the simple wrapping of the tendril, suggesting happiness in that exact light? Its roots remain, a broken stem. I wasn't evil, but I wasn't careful. This is what happens in the world. Now, soaking snipped vine in a glass of water, feeling the hope and weight of so many years.
Now Janine is going to read for Mark.
So I just shifted my screen so that it can include Jesse, because Jesse and Mark have a special love. And and I just want to say what an honor it is to read Mark's poem. He's been such an important teacher to me and just a very dear friend. And this is from, I think this was from Atlantis originally, and it's his poem In the Community Garden. It's almost over now, late summer's accomplishment, and I can stand face to face with this music, eye to seed paved eye with the sunflower's architecture. Such muscular leaves, the thick stems surge. Though some are still shiningly confident, others can barely hold their heads up. Their great leaves wrap the stalks like lowered shields. This one shrugs its shoulders. This one's in a rush to be nothing but form. Even at their zenith, you could see beneath the gold the end they'd come to. So what's the use of elegy? If their work is this skyrocket passage through the world, is it mine to lament them? Do you think they'd want to bloom forever? It's the trajectory they desire. Believe me, they do desire. You could say they are one intent, finally, to be this leaping green, this bronze haze bending down. How could they stand apart from themselves and regret their passing when they are a field of lifting and bowing faces, faces ringed in flames?
I miss Mark so much. And one of the reasons that I miss him is because he was going to read us Walt Whitman. And hearing him read Walt Whitman is a great joy. So here we are. The thing about Whitman is that he contains multitudes, so we can all read him. Song of Myself. The spotted hawk swoops by and accuses me. He complains of my gab and my loitering. I too am not a bit tamed. I too am untranslatable. I sound my barbaric yawp over the roofs of the world. The last scud of day holds back for me. It flings my likeness after the rest, and true as any on the shadowed wilds. It coaxes me into the vapor and the dusk. I depart as air. I shake my white locks at the runaway sun. I effuse my flesh in eddies and drift it in lacy jags. I bequeath myself to the dirt to grow from the grass I love. If you want me again, look for me under your boot soles. You will hardly know who I am or what I mean, but I shall be good health to you nevertheless, and filter and fiber your blood, failing to fetch me at first, keep encouraged, missing me one place, search another, I stop somewhere waiting for you. At this reading in Brooklyn, Mark said, there would be none of the poems in this book if it hadn't been for Walt Whitman. So, Danusha.
Hello, and thank you both for reading Mark's selections there. And hello, all you friends out there. I'm so grateful to be with you. I've been so grateful to be under the roof of poetry these days, carrying my own heavy heart. And in thinking about tending gardens, I thought about the different gardens we tend. One of them being that garden of compassion and the garden of our own heart. And when I was recently in a conversation with Koshin Paley Ellison of the New York Zen Center for Contemplative Care, I asked him, how do you tend your heart right now? Tell us. And he said, I let it break. So I've been walking with that and letting my own heart break. And it's good to be in company together of our broken hearts and still here with our words and our hearts broken but open. So thank you for being here in that spirit. And I'll begin with the poem Gift by Czesław Miłosz, since Naomi already read Worms. And also because I admire this poem. Gift. A day so happy. Fog lifted early. I worked in the garden. Hummingbirds were stopping over honeysuckle flowers. There was no thing on earth I wanted to possess. I knew no one worth my envying him. Whatever evil I had suffered, I forgot. To think that once I was the same man did not embarrass me. In my body, I felt no pain. When straightening up, I saw the blue sea and sails. And again, that was the gift on page 74, if you have this wonderful book, which, as others have said, is a beautiful artifact to have, as well as having for the pleasure of the poems in it. We get to be a little bit, what is the word? Superficial and just love the wrapping. But as Jane said recently, beauty gets to bear so much and to bring so much. Well, I'm not saying it quite right, Jane, but beauty carries us in these days. Apricot, page 126. It's Deborah Slicer's poem. And I have to love when the name of the poet somehow goes with the poem, as when I had a veterinarian for my cat whose name was Dr. Pet. That made me so happy, even though it had 2 T's. So I like that Ms. Slicer has written about a stone fruit. Apricot. A summer Taos sunset in your hand. The weight of a small child's fist. A girl resisting sleep as she sleeps. The shape of a chicken angel's egg. Eros's lovely clefted backside in velvet. Fleshy as a horse's lazy lower lip. A faraway fragrance, juniper in gin, that slow gin kiss. What God saw on the 8th day and ate and said of it, way good. The woody stone we worry gnaw when death's near, when we're toothless again as babies, trying to keep a great thought small. trying to keep a great thought small. That's the part of it that just keeps echoing in my mind after reading that poem. Do my little sip of tea and then read my own poem. And thank you again to the Zen Center for hosting, and Tess for giving us this reason to gather this bouquet. And this is a poem for my son, but also for everyone who has lost a loved one and thinks of them as you garden. That's what this poem touches on. Oops, I am open to feeding the worms. That would have been interesting. Okay, switching. Working in the garden, I think of my son, who is nothing now, but a few fistfuls of ash. Not even that, since ash dissolves and is taken into the bodies of plants or swept into the air on the wind. He's so very fine, he slips undetected through a whale's baleen or a beetle's gullet. He can even rise through a stalk of grass with the upward pull of phloem in these first green days of spring. He has no use now for the soft black hair through which I would run a slender comb, nor for his oddly shaped thumbs, nor anything in this world, though the things of the world may have use of him, his molecules filtering through them, carbon, oxygen, nitrogen, a whisper of hydrogen, the modest building blocks of life, quietly and without announcement.
Thank you so much for that. Next, we have Janine.
Okay, so I also am just so grateful to Zen Center for hosting this, and it's just such a joy to be here and be among everyone who's reading and everyone who's here. And I just thought I would say that one of my first jobs when I was on garden crew at Tassajara, which I was so thrilled to be on, and when I was at Tassajara in 2007, my jobs were, I was librarian and on garden crew. And I could not have been happier with those work assignments. But one of the first thing that I was asked to do was to prune the lavender. And the second thing, actually, Naomi was one of the first people I saw when I arrived there, and I knew that I was home. And I didn't even know Naomi at the time, but we just instantly kind of found each other. So it was actually my second job, which was I was asked to dust the leaves outside the abbot's cabin. And I knew that I was now working in a Zen garden, like it was literally like dusting the leaves. It was so lovely. So this poem is called Interview with the Pear Tree. And it first began as an essay, and it was really grounded in this question of how can you write a poem in the midst of huge suffering in the world? And I was kind of looking to plants to see how they were doing what they were doing. And what I saw was that they just like kept doing it. So that's what I took from that. Seems like especially poignant right now. Sorry. Okay. Interview with the pear tree. When did you start making pears? What is a pear? So it's Q&A, so I'll kind of pause between the two. She runs her fingers over one, hanging on the branch. Yes, it began before I could be seen, when the great body rang, striking for the first time the earth. Over the long day, it lay in the sun, and the birds came, and the flesh fell away, until all that was left was the seed. Maybe it was when the moon swelled the seed. Maybe when the first true leaf quickened. Did you always know you would make pears? I wouldn't know how not to. What is your process? I let the leaves come to the branch, and when the bee is at the blossom, I listen. Is dormancy difficult? Dormancy? A period when nothing happens. The tree pauses. I've never had one. What about drought? I spread my root hairs and wait. Do you ever doubt? When the bud breaks the green wood. Do you ever think of making apples? What is an apple? Could you describe the kind of pears you make? A ripe pear drops into her upturned hands. And then the other poem that I'm reading is by Susan Wen, and it's called Unending. I'm learning how to hold grief in my mouth, something alive until it isn't. Like a field is a field until it isn't, until it is just the color green. Listen when I tell you how a field folds into a clover when I am on my hands, how the memory of what I am looking for is not as important as the ground it claims. I don't mean that grief can be unalive, or that I keep it loaded in that place between lower lip and teeth. I mean, I never walked the land where my father harvested seeds. In his field, he waited for green to bend into gold, a single blade splitting light until there was nothing else. My father remembers. I watch my shadow. Thank you so much.
It's been such a piece of luck for me to spend time with these poems at the readings for this book. Such a joy. Next, we have Jane Hirschfield.
Well, thank you. One of the things we're hearing tonight, which is so moving to me, is the way that poems which were written into many other circumstances speak to current circumstances abidingly. And when we get to the poems that I'm going to read by other people, one of them, we selected these poems. We were asked to choose our poems by other people a long time ago, like 2 months ago. And yet, you know, the one that I chose is uncannily right for our current events. I'm going to start with one of my own poems in the book. I'm so glad Norman mentioned the recipes. It was great fun contributing a recipe to this book. The poem, because I have a new and selected poems out, I've been quite retrospective for a while. You have to choose them. You have to figure out what you're giving at readings. And, you know, there's 50 years of work in my book. There's 2,000 years of work in this anthology. So Virgil would have written before Whitman. So Mark has to give a couple exceptions. The title of this poem, which was written in 1982, is November Remembering Voltaire. And what I was remembering about Voltaire is not only the line referred to in the poem, it was also the end of Candide. And Candide, for any of you who remember having read this probably decades ago, it is about a search for the repair of the world, and a search which keeps being unsuccessful, one might say. And at the very end of Candide, what happens is our protagonist goes home to tend his own garden. And that also speaks, I think, to the frame that Norman gave this evening as he opened it. So much of practice is about taking care of what is given you to take care of in the most immediate ways as well as in the most far-flung ways. And so I suppose the point I want to make is tending your garden is also the practice of Zen and is also the work of peace. To foster beauty, to foster sustenance, it must begin under your own feet, and then it spreads, and the doing of it spreads, because there are so many things we could be doing that would be less for the future benefit of all beings and the present benefit of all beings. Okay, didn't mean to give a Dharma talk. So here's this 41-year-old poem, November Remembering Voltaire. In the evenings, I scrape my fingernails clean, hunt through old catalogs for new seed, oil, work boots, and shears. This garden is no metaphor, more a task that swallows you into itself, earth using, as always, everything it can. I lend myself to unpromising winter dirt with leaf mold and bulb, plant into the oncoming cold. Not that I ever thought the philosopher meant to be taken literally, but with no invented God overhead, I conjure a stubborn faith in rotting that ripens into soil, in an old corm that rises steadily each spring. Not symbols, but reassurances, like a mother's voice at bedtime reading a long familiar book, the known words barely listened to, but joining for all the nights of a life, each world to the next. So now the poem I was speaking of earlier, this is by Cholet Walpe, The Tulips of Tehran. This tulip garden north of the city is in bloom. From the adjacent ground comes the sounds of bickering, laughter, shouts of children. In a month, they will all be dead, the tulips. But now they stand tall on slim green stalks, flash fancy reds, pinks, and pearls. And the children? By dusk, they'll be back in their little homes, eating dinner, watching the country crumble on TV. This is the story of this garden, not of the children or the holy war they will soon have to fight. The tulips shiver and wait for now, and the damp soil swells with diligent worms. The garden bows before its own God. It will not believe in what cannot return. And to alter the mood of what I am reading, I will close with Ellen Bass's sous chef. I was a sous chef at Green's when it opened, when it was still all full-time Zen students who were working there. So if you ate at Green's restaurant in its first 3 years of dinners, I made your dinner. It was my final job at Zen Center. I also worked in the garden at Tassajara. I planted a tree. I realized the tree is 50 years old now, still going at Tassajara, inside the perimeter of all those fires. Anyhow, sous chef by Ellen Bass. I like cutting the cucumber, the knife slicing the darkness into almost transparent moons, each with its own thin rim of night. I like smashing the garlic with the flat of steel and peeling the sticky, papery skin from the clove. Tell me what to do. I'm free of will. I carve the lamb into 1-inch cubes. I don't use a ruler, but I'd be happy to. Give me a tomato bright as a parrot. Give me peaches like burning clouds. I'll pare those globes until dawn. The syrup will linger on my fingers like your scent. Let me escape my own insistence. I am the bee feeding the queen. Show me how you want the tart glazed. I still have opinions, but I don't believe in them. Let me fillet the supple bones from the fish. Let me pit the cherries, husk the corn. You say how much cinnamon to spice the stew. I've made bad decisions, so I'm grateful for this yoke lowered onto my shoulders, potatoes mounded before me. With all that's destroyed, look how this world still yields a golden pear. Freckled and floral, a shimmering marvel. It rests in my palm so heavily, perfectly. Somewhere there is hunger, somewhere fear. But here the chopping block is solid, my blade sharp. So wasn't that Janine's pear? I mean, all these poems begin to speak to one another in this great sangha of this book and of Zen Center's sangha and of the sangha made by everybody who is gathered here this evening. Okay, the next to read will be Tess.
I'm going to read two poems, one by me, one by Virgil, but translated by me. And this poem came shortly after I knew about this anthology, though I didn't know yet that this poem would be the poem that I put in the anthology. It's for this season that we're in, the harvesting of green tomatoes. For those of you that are gardeners, one of the joys is being with the food all the way from sprout to seed and getting to eat it at sort of non-traditional times. And green tomatoes are a delicious late fall offering, something that didn't ripen. But this is also for another season that we're not quite in right now, but have been in quite a bit lately. So the poem is called Green Tomatoes in Fire Season. There is smoke in the air when I go pick them. I go despite panic, also because inside I'll make chutney. For an hour or so, I unlatch them. It is late fall. They will not ripen. Firm, pale green skins, fine-coated in ash. Our fire season goes all autumn now, though today's fire is not yet near to us. But the green tomatoes, I love their pale lobes. Tonight, God willing, we will fry some with cornmeal and fish. Inside the air purifier whirs, I will boil them with molasses and raisin, jar them for friends and for the winter. Disaster, we say, meaning bad star. These are good green stars. This is also their season. Mask on, I bend and bend to the vine. I bend and salvage what I can. It's interesting to think about what we do with climate grief, and how to manage it. And I think just even having places to put it down, to name it, can be, to language it, can be one of the sources of comfort. Jane read this at the first reading of this anthology. And one of the reasons I hadn't really thought about it is it's just like an enthusiastic extra. I was having so much fun adding poems to the book that I called at the last minute. I was like, are there space for just two more? And the lovely editor and designer wedged this one in after the acknowledgements, as if like I couldn't quite stop with thinking of gardening poems. This is from the Georgics. The Georgics are not merely poems of food and peace. They're also poems where the threat of destruction of that peace is always at the edges. People are always coming home from war. They're always going off to war. They're always tending fields that were untendable during the time of war. And so in the joy, there's always a little bit of a memento mori about how fragile these things that we are so lush really are on so many levels. And so this little snippet really called to me. And I think, like so many poems, there's a way that we'll hear it sharply tonight, perhaps. Olives. Olives, by contrast, need no care. Don't call for machete or stubborn hoe. Once they've clung to the fields and bowed with the breezes, the earth which the plowshare exposed of herself offers up the moist, heavy fruit. Oh, suckle the olive, fat, pleasing to peace. And that's where we're pausing now, partly to have conversation for a few minutes. All of us are assembled, and I think somebody is going to take questions about this moment and about these poems, and then I think we'll close with one last poem at the end. I think you can put questions in the chat if you'd like, or if you'd even like to unmute yourself, I think the space could allow that as well.
Where can we buy the book?
Thank you for asking. You can buy the book. There's a link for the book purchasing in the chat. So that's at the San Francisco Zen Center. There's 20 signed copies. So if you order right away, you'll get a signed copy. There's another link that I feel like is very important to mention. There's access to a matching grant right now for support of the Zen Center and its facilities and programming. And we wanted to encourage anybody that's here tonight. You're a lovely audience of over 100 people, that even if everybody made a $2 donation, that would be, on its way to being doubled, would just give a sizable gift to the Zen Center collectively in community. So there's also a link for that. So you can buy the book through the link, and you can you can support the Zen Center through a special Venmo that's also in the chat. Thank you. I think that was a great way to ask a question. Does anyone else want to bring a comment or a question to the
There's
space?
one in the chat for you.
Oh, how did I decide which poems to include? That is a really good question. The history of gardening poems is very long. The word paradise actually means walled garden. Plants are deeply interwoven with every culture's historic literature. So if I had wanted to do something deep and scholarly, I probably could have filled like 25 volumes. And then there's also another kind of gardening poem that's theoretical a little bit, like Marianne Moore has an imaginary garden with real toads in it. And it's kind of a thought garden. But I really realized I wanted people who are touching the earth and touching the food and bringing the food to their lips and touching the soil and touching the worms. Because I think we live in a time where we have great confusion about how to live in our bodies, on the earth, with food, with each other. And so I think the poems in the book are by and large really all poems of like deep physical presence. And that seemed to become like an important criteria. But I also felt so deeply that gardens are a space that build diversity from the soil up. They build it for pollinators. They build it for the microbial community. They build it for everything that wilds and weeds. They build it in incredible ways. And I wanted this book to be a book that expressed some of the enormous diversity of the work that's happening in poetry right now, and the communities that are writing poetry. And so that was something that was important to me. And Amy Nezhukumatatle, who's a fabulous poet, said that she felt like this was one of these books that expanded the diversity of a genre really quick, in an important gesture. And I was really flattered by that, because I think it's, that's one of the things that the arts can do for us. They can allow us to cross borders with our breath and build empathy with each other. And in that way, they're like that gardening action where plants begin to weave together and kind of invite in more plants. They create something denser and more beautiful than might have been there otherwise. If you're in the Bay Area and need compost worms, you can DM Janine Lentine.
Or if you're in Santa Cruz, you could DM me.
Would anyone else like to share anything?
Could you share some of the illustrations?
Oh, surely. I would be happy to. Hold on one second.
And who is the illustrator?
Oh, she's this marvelous woman named Melissa Castrillon, and she is based in Britain and represented by an illustration company called Pickled Ink. And she does a lot of children's books. And it's interesting because somebody said to me, why it's so grown-ups don't get enough illustrated books. We need them too. And so that was really lovely that she said that. I know from Instagram that she's just had a baby, Melissa Castrillon. But the feeling of the illustrations is really intimate. This section is called Harvest and Feeding, but we're really just like seeing someone's feet and a little the berries they're picking. So you're kind of down. All of the pictures kind of pull you into this magical internal weedy wilding landscape. Hannah asks whether we have suggestions on how to listen to plants and hear their poetry. Janine, would you talk about listening to plants, since that was the subject of your poem, Interviewing a Pear Tree? It's a great writing exercise, by the way. Everyone should interview, to think of what you need to interview. And to, it's like the making of a poem right there. Janine?
Thank you so much for that question. I want to read exactly how you asked it. Suggestions on how to listen to plants and hear their poetry. Yes, it's such a beautiful question, because so often our attention is visual, like in a garden, or like scent. And so I think that plants are so often, through the example of the way they live, through the different habits they have, or the different ways they adapt, they're always speaking to us in their gestures. And I also want to just say, this is not an aside, this is a centering of Louise Glick, who just recently died. Her amazing book, The Wild Iris, is an ongoing conversation with many plants and entities in a garden. That might be a wonderful a book for you to turn to if you don't already know it. But I think mainly it just has to do with pausing and just letting yourself have an encounter with something, being receptive, turning your attention to something you might otherwise go past at a different pace. And sometimes it feels very literal. Sometimes it feels like, obviously pure projection, like you kind of hear from the plant exactly what you are trying to figure out. But But mostly I think it's just like surprise, this ongoing delight and surprise. And of course, there are more literal ways to listen to plants too, just like the rustling of leaves and the movement of animals through plants, etc. So I think just like taking the occasion of your wonderful question as a kind of study that you conduct every day. So thank you so much.
Somebody asked if anyone would read a recipe as if it was a poem. And I wanted to just talk about that for a moment, that when the book came into being, I didn't know yet about the recipes. It was kind of a later ask from the publisher. And so I asked different poets, actually Danusha and Jane both have poem recipes and meditations that break up the flow of the book. So I'm hoping that Jane will read her recipe, actually that she would read her recipe for fava beans as if it were a poem. And then I hope that Danusha would read her meditation. I think that would be great. But I wanted to share with you all that the book is divided in these seasons, and the seasons are sort of the year, but they also kind of are seasons of the spirit. So they're planting and sprouting, weeding and wilding, growing and tending, being and waiting, grieving and release, harvest and feeding, wintering and turning again. And so I wanted to leave space for the kind of reverie that we come to gardens for, and also that we come to gardens sometimes to grieve and to allow difficult things to pass through. And actually, it was Danusha's poem about grieving her son that made me realize that that was a garden season, that it wasn't just about unrooting things or replanting, but it was about allowing time and space, allowing life to show us its transforming power in miniature in a garden, and allowing that time and space to move through us. And I mean life writ large, this big system that we're part of, and which we echo in so many ways. So it really does touch me that recipes are like poems. And I'd love for Jane to read her recipe for fava beans, which, by the way, is fabulous. You should make it.
Unmute. Okay, there we go. If you want my recipe for fava beans, you're going to have to get the book, because I am going instead to give you one of my favorite things in the book, which is Brenda Hillman's recipe. And it's very relevant to what we were just talking about also. So her preface to it is 2 paragraphs long. I'm going to give you that, and then her marvelous recipe, Reaching Past the Human. So this is Brenda Hillman. My poetic practices in this human existence are influenced by a variety of mythic, naturalist, scientific, and historical models. I have talked to plants since childhood because my mother talked to plants, and her mother did before her. It seemed a smart thing to do to reach out past the human species. Talking to plants is not mere animistic wish fulfillment. It stems from a sense that whatever experience the plants are having is adjacent to our own, and that there are, between our physical outlines, some liminal spaces for play, places to create something more than humanistic projections. In childhood, I talked to plants because I sympathized with them, stuck in their pots or soil, unable to walk away. Now I talk to them with a bit of poetic performance or ritual, even in secret. Though I have no idea if experience is the right word, I would like the plants to experience what I am able to offer, as I try to take back some of the harm my human footprint might have caused on the planet. And here's her recipe. Brenda's garden greens. Go out to the garden if you have a garden, or to the market if you don't. Check to see what is coming up and not eaten by aphids. Gather a combination of greens, small kale leaves, small collards, the red-veined Japanese green that Luke planted, some mustard greens, not too many, they are peppery, and arugula or dandelion greens. Our chard tends to get bugs, so we stopped trying. Talk to the rest of the plants encouragingly in whatever language or tone you use for the purpose. Take the cut ones inside, rinse them off, save the water in a bucket to carry back out to the garden. Saute a lot of garlic, at least a half tablespoon, in 2 or more tablespoons olive oil. Add lots of shallots, chopped up. When they are limp, add your greens to the pan. Decide whether you want to eat them bright green and a bit crunchy, in which case stir them with a wooden spoon for 5 minutes or so, or stewed a long time, in which case you can add some broth and cover for 1 to 2 hours. And I will just say of my fava beans that it's a recipe for eating them in the whole pod, rather than have this enormous plant, which takes up so much space in the garden, and then you get a few little emeralds out of it. You can actually eat the whole pod, which was a lovely discovery. Okay, Danusha, over to Danusha.
Thank you, Jane. And I'm discovering a new pleasure, which is being read recipes by poets. That's an unexpected new pleasure. So thank you. I mean, really. Thank you. And yes, I will read page 104 for those of you who already have the book. And thank you, Tess, for your words about that place in the garden. I really felt that in my heart, just making that space for grief as well in the garden. Grief and sustenance. Why do we grieve in gardens? The psychotherapist and former monk Thomas More once suggested that we each consider planting a garden to Saturn, a designated place to hold our melancholy and grief. I'm not sure what I would put in mine, but I imagine it to be mossy and secluded. And come to think of it, I did keep a small corner of a garden at my former home to go to when I needed to cry. It was fairly unadorned, just a pink camellia shrub against the house and a stone lion's head which hung from the tall wooden fence. No one could see me there. I could address my woes to the lion, which stared on, impassive and detached, as I wished I could have been. I was a mother of a child who would never walk or talk or speak. A trinity of omissions that felt back then almost unbearable. And worse, he would not live long. I'd buried his placenta under a lemon tree in the backyard. I'd watered too many hopes for him, my only child. And now, in some ways, his memory waters me, grows me into the unexpected self I keep becoming. Thank you for requesting that, and we never know what grows us in new ways as well. So thanks for offering the space for that contemplation.
Thank you so much, Danusha. Thank you so much, Jane. Thank you, working backwards, to all the poets who are here tonight. Janine, and not Mark, but thank you, Mark. And thank you, Naomi. And thank you, people, because I'm seeing a lot of feeling of being tended within this space. And I just want to honor the fact that we can do this for each other, that we can tend each other. So I'm going to end with a poem that's, again, the last poem in the book, the one that I wedged in almost at press time. Thank you, my gracious editor, for listening to me. And at the first reading, Forrest Gander said it this way: I wrote this poem in 1818 under the pseudonym John Keats. On the grasshopper and cricket. The poetry of earth is never dead. When all the birds are faint with the hot sun and hide in cooling trees, a voice will run from hedge to hedge about the new mown mead. That is the grasshopper's. He takes the lead in summer luxury he has never done with his delights, for when tired out with fun, he rests at ease beneath some pleasant weed. The poetry of earth is ceasing never on a lone winter evening when the frost has wrought a silence. From the stove there shrills the cricket's song, in warmth increasing ever, and seems to one in drowsiness half lost, the grasshoppers beneath some grassy hills. Thank you all for being here with us on this night.
Thank you, everybody. Thank you, poets. Thank you, poetry. Thank you, gardens. Thank you, human beings and the earth and the Zen Center. Good night, everybody. Please take care of yourselves.
Good night.